Okay, it's now 4:30, time for the scheduled work session on the draft Soldotna Arts and Culture, excuse me, Culture Master Plan. And we have with us today Inger Deedy and John Pappendike from the Agnew Beck Consulting. And we'll turn it over to you and go for it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
So just quick introductions. I'm John Pappendike, work at Agnew Beck Consulting, and been really excited to get to work on this project. Inger and I are both, we're married, living down here, working down here. We're both artists, and it's been a fun project, and it's cool, all of the work that the city's been doing to support the arts and just sort of the vision that's been carrying out. I'll let you introduce, and Inger's she's got a little cold today, so she is via Zoom so that you guys don't get a cold too. So let her take it.
Yes. Thank you everyone for accommodating that. And I also wanted to give a shout out. I think I see Bunny Swan sitting behind you. Is that right, John? I think that's Bunny. So just wanted to acknowledge that she's with us here today and has served as an advisor for us on this project so far. So, and Laura, I just wanted to double check, did you want to do an introduction or should I dive right in?
Go ahead and dive in.
You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So again, I just want to say thank you everyone for, I'm glad for this hybrid meeting option because I am very congested and I'm thankful to not have to risk passing this on to any of you, this lovely summer cold that I have. So I'd like to do a quick introduction and overview of the plan for you. And hopefully you can see the slides I've got pulled up. And then after that, I think we'd like to dig into the recommendations that are in the plan and really get your feedback on that and get your comments. But before we jump into the overview, I just wanted to acknowledge the team that's been working on this. On the left on the slide, you can see the core project team and a few people that deserve a special shout out for their role on this plan. And then on the other side, you can see our steering committee listed, which includes artists, culture bearers, and members of key organizations in our community. We're really thankful for their input on this project and for the chance to get to present this to you today. And so, like I said, we're looking forward to digging in later into the recommendations that are outlined in the plan and just getting your feedback. So some quick background and context, and I know some of you might have the plan printed out in front of you. And so what I'll be doing now is basically doing a condensed version of what you've got in the plan in front of you, taking us all the way right up to the recommendations section, and then I'll hand it off to John to go through that with you. And the recommendations we'll just sit and look at that together in front of you. But this part I just wanted to do as a brief overview. So just to give you the in-depth detail about the plan. The draft Soldotna Arts and Culture Master Plan is an outline of how the city of Soldotna will support arts and culture over the next 10 years. And we also acknowledge that this is really just the beginning. And so it could be that you'll adjust it and change it far before that time. But that was kind of our goal, is to think about something that could work for the next 10 years. It establishes priorities and actions to achieve the plan goals and backed by policies and a commitment of resources. And it recognizes that some of the recommendations are better led by other organizations beyond the city, and it identifies specific ways that the city can partner with and support those organizations. The plan recognizes that arts and culture play a crucial role in our community, and I won't go into this list of 10 ways, but this is a list that's 10 ways that arts and culture contribute to the social, educational, and economic development of a community. So if you want to look at that list, you can. And like I said, it's also covered in more detail in the plan. Additionally, the plan also has a section in it that identifies that the city of Soldotna has a history of supporting arts and culture initiatives but has not had a formal process in place for doing so. And so you'll also see in the plan a nice little capture of some of the things that the city has done in the past and is currently doing to support arts and culture. So like I said earlier, this plan is the beginning of Soldotna's journey. And so we really kept a focus on ideas to explore, resources to find, and partnerships to build for collaboration. The plan covers, it takes a look at where we are now and what the role of arts and culture is in our daily lives. It looks at how other communities support arts and culture and what Soldotna can learn from what some other communities do and apply to our community. It includes an assessment of a community's existing cultural assets and venues, and it identifies areas for improvement and potential opportunities. It includes a summary of input that we received from the community and feedback from the community. And in the plan, we identified 4 major outcomes that came out of that work, listening to the community, which we'll go into a little bit later. But those are identify, connect, re-energize, and integrate. And like I said, we'll look at those a little closer later. And then the plan has recommendations and strategies that can be implemented by the city and by a to-be-formed Regional Arts and Culture Council and the Soldotna Chamber of Commerce. Those are the 3 main players. So I just wanted to quickly touch on the public engagement that we did and just let you know how that was shaped and what types of things we did. So the recommendations that we are going to go over were shaped by input from residents of the area, and we drew from ideas and inspirations from models implemented in communities that are similar to our size, and we looked at nationally recognized best practices. So our public engagement included key informant interviews, which was primarily with our steering committee and then some additional community members. We had engagement at some public events, and we did an online survey, and from that we also did some mapping of different assets in our community. And then we also did a planned preview at the first Wednesday market Music in the Park event, which was pretty rainy and cold. And we were glad for the city of Soldotna covering that you guys have, which was great. And then the sun did come out at some point, which was also really nice. So here's a quick overview of the survey that we administered. This question we asked of how important is art and culture to you? 73% of the survey participants said arts and culture was very important to them. 80% said preserving historical and cultural heritage is very important. And then this last one is really interesting, that nearly half of the survey participants attend arts and culture events once a month or more, nearly half, so 44%. And that is especially interesting and actually very uplifting, especially given what you can see in that blue panel. We heard a lot about, when we asked what the biggest challenges are and some of the biggest barriers to participation in arts and culture in our community, we heard a lot about people expressing that they felt there was a lack of venues, a lack of space for these kind of events to exist. And then we heard a lot about people just not being aware of what's going on in the community, not hearing about things, wanting a place where they could go look, where they could see what's going on in the community. So given all of that, I think it's pretty cool to see that such a high number of people already are attending these events once a month or more, even given the fact that they feel like there aren't a lot of things going on and they don't know about the things that are going on. So that I thought was actually pretty inspiring to see that there are a lot of people that are interested and already supporting these kind of efforts in our community.
Interrupt you here for just a second. How many?
Oh, sure.
How many people were surveyed or contacted involved in this?
So
the survey we ended. Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry, there were 211 people who completed the survey. So, and then we had the public engagement events, I don't have a tally offhand of how many people we interacted with there, but it was pretty steady.
Thank you.
So another, and I also did mean to say thank you, Mayor, for raising that question. And if you all have any other questions, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. And you might have to shout out because you're very tiny on my screen. So feel free to jump in. So this other portion of the survey, we asked what type of arts and culture do people engage with most, and what would people like to see more of? And I think from what you can see here, I think the types of art and culture that people currently engage with most is kind of also a reflection of the types of activities that we have right now. I think you see a lot about the live music. People are going to things at the music at Soldotna Creek Park. They're using the parks and open spaces that are available. So I think you see there reflected some of the things that are currently working in town. And then I think what you'd like to see more of is a pretty accurate reflection of showing that people are interested in seeing more visible art, which I think is reflected in that murals, street art, and public art section. And there's also a lot of expression for just more community events and specifically classes and educational offerings. We heard a lot of people brought up that they loved when we used to have community schools available in our community. So our primary takeaway from the survey was that we really feel like we saw that we have a community with a strong love of arts and culture and a desire to engage and participate in arts and culture activities.
And maybe just to tack on a little bit there as well, with what we heard in the survey and saw in the comments of the survey in the open-ended questions was also in line with what we are hearing in our conversations with the public as well, that it was those same barriers that came up as we were talking, and it was the same types of activities and that they would like to see more of as well. So.
Great. And also, we will be making available, or when we wrap up the report, we're going to include the full survey results and all of the comments, just for anyone who wanted to look at those a little more in depth. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to just start showing you this beautiful artwork that Caitlin Vodla made for us for the event where we shared our plan in the park at Soldotna Creek Park. And so this is a lovely mashup that you can see of the literal landscape of our community. So you can see where the roads and the river and the Cook Inlet are there and are placed pretty accurately to how they really are on a map. And then we also have she identified for us in a more artistic way some of the features of our arts landscape at this point. And then what we did at the park was we had this up and it was giant and people could walk up to it and engage with it, and they could add to it specific places where they see art and culture happening, and they could write onto it, or we sometimes wrote for them specific features of the landscape. And so all of this information is also ending up in a list that we've compiled of all the assets and resources that we currently have in our community. So this just provided a lovely snapshot of kind of where we are now. And I think it shows how integrated the different places in our community are, not just right in the Soldotna city limits, but that we expand out in kind of in all directions in our community. But a lot of even people that live outside of the city of Soldotna are interacting and engaging in the city. This next board, also drawn by Caitlin, is what I was talking about earlier, where we took what we heard from our survey and from our conversations and interviews, and this is kind of distilled down into four main buckets that we saw. So the first one, as you can see, is to increase awareness and visibility. So this, I think, really gets at where we heard a lot of people say that they don't feel like they know what's going on in our community and that they feel like they miss things. So there's this desire to have some kind of arts and cultural calendar or one place to go to get that kind of information. We also heard a lot of interest in a directory where people could see all the different resources that we have and get connected that way. The second bucket is, and I realize I'll wrap this up here in just a minute so we can move on towards the work session part, but just to finish this up, the second part is that we heard about creating connections that support arts and culture. So you'll see that a lot in our recommendations, that there's a desire just to connect across disciplines and connect with local businesses, connect to collaborative project opportunities, think about what funding streams we can connect, and opportunities to exhibit work or create places that things can be seen, just basically working together to create connections and leverage what we've got in our community. The third section is this re-energize and make arts and culture accessible and a part of everyday life. So we heard a lot about an interest in getting something going like a First Friday art walk, which I realize would not be probably a physical walk because it might go beyond just our city limits, but there could be pieces of it ultimately that are a walk. There's a desire for public art and beautification. Also, there was a lot of discussion about incorporating Dena'ina language place names and signage for cultural sites. And then this is the bucket where we saw a lot about desires for something like community schools or programs like that that are really benefiting people on their day-to-day level and improving their daily life. So what I can take away from this bucket too is that we've had a lot of history in our community over time of a lot of different programs and people trying out different things. So there's a lot we can learn sometimes from what we've already done in the past, but has maybe expired or frittered out or whatever over time. There's some possibility in re-energizing things and just learning from some of the things we've done in the past. And then lastly, we want to integrate arts and culture into local planning efforts, which I think you'll see is the part that is most predominantly going to be in the City of Soldotna recommendations. This is where we'll be digging in first today and looking at the possibility for a local arts commission, arts and culture tourism promotion, and then some different strategies around how we can change things up a little bit to open up things in municipal code and make more possibility for arts and culture opportunities through things like micro loans, coordination between organizations, how we use staff time, things like that. So I'm going to go really fast, one more minute here. Just really quick, this part is also in the plan in detail, but this is just where we broke out the levels of how much the city owns duties that are outlined here versus how much they coordinate with partners. So ultimately, we're looking at, trying to really get things to where there are tons of partnerships going on, and the city has roles, but other entities have roles as well. Just to keep that work distributed. And we also outlined, and you can read this in depth in the plan, the different roles of the city, the roles of a future regional arts and culture council, and the roles that we can see for the Chamber of Commerce. So with that, that's the end of the slide show, and we can transition towards looking at your plan, the recommended action section. And if it works for y'all, I'll just leave this up, this screenshot, because it shows, again, our 4 primary areas that we identified. And so that might be nice for us to reference as we dig in. Are there any questions right now after I did a lot of talking? Or if not, we can just dig right into the recommendations.
I guess I have one question. When you mentioned regional combination, how do you define regional?
That's a great question. We looked at regional. I think for us, one of the things that came about right away when we started talking to people is that things got mentioned. Somebody would mention something that's already happening in Kenai, like the Kenai Arts Center, or they would mention, oh, I have a studio in Kasilof. And so we learned that people really, they traverse between all of the different places on the Kenai Peninsula, but but primarily in our area, in the greater Soldotna and Kenai area, and that really people don't feel, they're not limited by, if they live in Soldotna, they don't feel limited to go to a show in Kenai or move around and about like that. So we learned that there's a lot of transitional space in our community. So we looked at the region as being the greater Soldotna area and including some of those outlying Sterling, Kasilof, and City of Kenai areas into our thinking. I realize that the city can only affect policies that are related for the city, but we thought about the people as moving in between all of those spaces.
Thank you.
Okay, you take over from here, John, if there are any other questions.
Sure. Thanks, Inger. And Johnny, were you did you want to put the recommendations? Oh, okay. You want to stop sharing your screen then, Inger?
Oh, right. Okay, yes, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, so for this next part of the work session, that we wanted to just take a moment and really have it be more of a truly like a work session where we can hopefully get your feedback and your thoughts as we work through what we have set up for recommendations and strategies. So that the first part was kind of to give you a background of what we did and what we had heard about and how we got to these recommendations. So we're starting out on page 24, 25 in your packet, or it's up online here. And so the first recommendation that we had was this idea of that the city of Soldotna, there are some actions that aren't really well suited for the city to be doing that would really be supporting the arts. And so one of our first recommendation was the formation of and participation in a regional arts council. So helping to identify partners and convening a working group towards that. And then the specific strategy on that is forming a board with representation in Kenai, Soldotna, and other areas. And then some notes on possible funding sources, referencing back to the benchmark study we did for the city of Homer and how their arts council is funded in there as well. And I think probably what we'll do is I'll just kind of be reading through and working on these. And if you have any questions on them, please just, let me know and we'll pause on them.
So John, on page 18 and 19,
Yeah.
you talk about Homer and Moab, Utah, and what's set up there. As you look at going through and based on these recommendations, would you see the greater Soldotna area going with a Homer or more of a Moab, Utah format?
Thanks. That's a great question. So in Moab, Utah, their structure is definitely more city focused. There's a city department and a lot, I think there's like 4 staff members. It's a pretty very city centric approach to the arts. And it seemed to us that a more reasonable model, especially considering the fact that we are in a multi-city area, was to move to something more like Homer. The difference being in Homer, their arts council is just the Homer Arts Council, but I'm pretty sure they probably work with some of the local communities as well. So definitely, I think moving towards a model like Homer is kind of the direction that we're recommending and that we're envisioning as we're looking at these strategies.
Yeah, we generally, sorry if I can jump in really quick, John, we generally, our takeaway from studying Homer and studying Moab was that things were definitely a little more separated between what the city does as functions and in Homer, things were more separated between what the city does and what the Arts Council does. And then there are definitely places where they collaborate and work together, but they had distinct and separate functions, where in Moab, it was much more the city kind of housed more or less everything and did all the functions. So that was kind of the contrast that we saw. And we, at this point, are definitely thinking we'd lean more towards the Homer model.
So as a follow-up, has anybody in the Central Peninsula kind of raised their hand and said, yeah, having a regional council would be a great idea? This is
Yeah.
something we should be moving on and doing.
Yeah, so we, in kind of our conversations, we've, on our steering committee, have the Kenai Arts Guild, and we have folks that are part of that we spoke with who are part of the Kenai Potters Guild. So a lot of like those organizations that are kind of right now pretty siloed, a number of them, they expressed this idea of wanting to have that, talking with the local theater groups as well. They decided that was something that they were interested in, to sort of meet that need of helping create one space where there's clarity about what's happening and access to resources and all of that part.
What's the city of Kenai think?
So we don't know that part. As far as the city of Kenai, we did talk with some folks that were in the Kenaitze tribe, and it sounded like there maybe was some interest in that as well. So definitely we're at the point where we need to be doing kind of a little bit of that research to see if that is feasible to get all those folks on board. Yeah.
And also from the city, not from the city staff at Kenai, but within the city of Kenai, we got one of our steering committee members, Abby Yulin, is on the board for the Kenai Arts Center. And so she was really active, and I think there's a lot of potential interest there. Well.
Follow up by me, Mr. Mayor. So kind of expanding on this discussion,
Yeah.
if I'm reading these examples from Homer and Utah, and also looking at the recommendation list, specifically recommendation 1, recommendation 3, it really seems that we need two different entities that are really kind of guiding arts and culture development in our area. You have a municipal entity, whether or not that be, direct staff like you have with Moab, or a commissioner advisory board like what we see with Homer. And then in partnership with that, you need an entity that's community based, whether again that's specific to your city or a regional one. I would like to see this pursued in one way where we have, pursuing the regional entity being, the regional arts council, and then something that's specific to our city, like an arts and culture advisory board, and maybe not necessarily a full commission. I absolutely agree that I think there's benefit in our community in pursuing something that's regional scale, because we have all these different entities that you kind of exist outside Soldotna, but operate within our city. And, you raise the water level, you raise all the boats. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Soldotna, but I don't want to lose focus that, part of the goal of this original discussion was to get more art in Soldotna. And that's kind of what I'd like to see the advisory board potentially established in tandem with this regional arts council. And I'm just asking for clarification, I guess. Am I understanding that correctly, that these would be two things that can go in parallel? It's not necessarily the regional arts council or something that's kind of more with municipally focused, whether it's that advisory board or staff that's handling this?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So we broke the recommendations down into the recommended actions that the city would have, and then for the Arts and Culture Council, and then there are some things that are more directly related to like a chamber type of activity.
Okay.
And so the idea would be that the three groups are sort of working in tandem and in coordination. And we did talk about an arts advisory board, and right now with the advisory board we have for the Parks and Rec and the library, we figured we can probably manage to sort of meet that need, not have to create another board, but they're already kind of involved in a lot of these discussions right now about placement of art and acceptance of art and programming around arts and culture as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we get to recommendation number 3, we'll dive into a little bit more into that. But we were kind of looking at historically what the city has done, things like most recently the salmon sculpture that went before the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and then before the council. But that step, when we get to it, is a little bit more having kind of a specific policy and procedure in place that would formalize kind of the way we've been doing things And then if it got to a point where, this arts and culture initiatives became so popular that we needed a separate body to handle those requests, that might be something down the road. But at this point, we thought those existing bodies could maybe handle it in the short term.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks for the questions. Also, maybe just one more little follow-up on that. In bullet number 3, which is, recommendation number 3, which is developing policies and processes for commissioning and accepting donations of art, including policies around ownership and maintenance, decommissioning the art. That's where we're talking about using these existing boards. But one of the strategies that we had is maybe as a stopgap as well, making an effort as board vacancies do open and we begin to letting arts and culture organizations know that these are there, and so that hopefully we can start to get some representation inside of those as well, inside of those existing commissions or advisory boards. So maybe we'll jump back to number 2. So call out arts and murals as allowable expenditures under existing city grant programs. So adding public art like murals, sculptures to the list of allowable improvements in the storefront improvement program, making sure the arts community knows of that change and that is an allowable improvement. And then the city or Soldotna Chamber of Commerce or a future regional arts council could house a list of artist contacts for businesses that are interested in connecting with the arts. So this idea of if once we identify that murals are possible, having there be a mechanism to let people know who around does murals, or if they're interested in creating another form of public art, who around is available to do that, and having the Chamber of Commerce manage that list of artists along with their other, because they're further down in recommendation 17, they're managing the list of artists. So it made sense to connect those two together.
And looking at this, I noticed that, at least I don't remember seeing it in here. The hospital used to display a lot of artwork in there. And I don't, unless I missed it, I didn't see them listed in here as a location. Yeah, so we have a list of arts and culture assets that's in an appendix. It's a ginormous spreadsheet. And so the full list will be in there where we list out all the galleries and the music venues and theater groups and all of that. So they're identified there along with the other galleries like the KPEDD.
Yeah, and thank you, because I'm writing that down to make sure. Well, I'm writing everything down that you guys are saying, and then also I'll write that one down as something we should double check that we have that on our list for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So in recommendation number 3, that was the recommendation we read a minute ago about commissioning, accepting donations, and kind of managing that process, setting up policy and process around that. The strategies that we had identified were basically that we align these with what with other public sector owned and managed art, historical structures, and property, that we include the local arts organizations in when advertising about vacancies of the boards, and we consider forming an arts and culture advisory board if the volume of projects merits its own advisory board. And we can jump forward.
One thing just to say on this especially number 2 and number 3, I think one thing that we learned that I think is nice is that some of the things that you guys are already doing, like the storefront improvement program, we just saw that there's a real opportunity there, that if we just emphasize art in some of those things and then try to make sure that arts organizations know about some of these things, that's one way to really leverage the work that you're already doing and expand the art and culture aspect of it a little bit more. Say that.
Okay, so recommendation number 4 was to explore the creation of a public art fund and mechanisms for the city to support the creation of public art and programming. Specific strategies were to explore the creation of a mini grant program that is specific to funding arts and culture programming, to develop a methodology that's clear and consistent for calls for public art, and then structuring the public art fund to allow access to grants that require matching funds.
At one time, the feds had a program that arts and stuff. Are they still doing that, or is that one of the things that have gone by the wayside also?
As far as funding for art, or sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so the NEA is one of the
Mhm.
funders that the Homer Council on the Arts has received a grant from, and they've got a series of different grant programs that they release, and then the state also has State Council on the Art has grants as well, and then yeah, so there are several opportunities to go after grants. And one of the things that we saw is a lot of times there is a need for a match. And so that's one of the ideas with having a fund, is having funding that is, available and already been established, that then could be used to go after a grant with a match, and you're doubling the money available then. So.
And their communities do that in different ways. There are some, you may have heard, like a 1% for the arts program, where for Homer, for example, anytime they do a large capital project in Homer, 1% of the budget, I believe that the project's over $250,000, is designated for a public art component. So that's one model, one way to do it. Some communities, say if they have a tax specific related to tourism or some sort of visitor industry, they might designate a portion of that for public art or something like that. So there's a number of different ways that could look. And so we left that recommendation fairly general on what it could be a public art fund.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And also, one thing to just jump in and say there too, really quick, is in the studies where we looked at Homer and that city of Moab, one thing that I found to be really nice about chatting with some of the people from Homer Council on the Arts, and then also being able to look at the Homer Code, which we include links to all of these things in the benchmark studies that we're going to put in the appendix. But it's really nice because you can really dig right into what their code says about some of these things, and it's very helpful to be able to see really specifically how they've structured it and kind of use that as a frame of reference.
So recommendation number 5 was to incorporate public art into infrastructure planning and beautification projects. So identifying locations for installation of public art in or on city facilities, parks, utility boxes, light pole, banners, wayfinding signage, etc. Expanding and highlighting existing public art offerings at municipal facilities and parks, and promoting these opportunities to the arts and culture community. We're trying to think about how, rather than creating all new public art, finding ways for public art to show up and culture to be integrated into projects that are already being worked on, so that it's like isolated standalone process, but something that's integral. It's really what we were wanting to get at with this recommendation.
And acknowledging that some of these things you are already doing, like in the example of using the local photographers in some of the light pole banners and the things that you've done at the park, bringing art into that. So kind of just expanding and emphasizing that kind of action.
Mm-hmm. And then recommendation number 6 was building partnership with the Dena'ina Language Institute and the Knights Indian Tribe to explore the incorporation of traditional place names in Soldotna. So exploring the potential to incorporate Dena'ina language and cultural elements into new naming of buildings, parks, streets, and programs. considering educational signage and wayfinding for culture and historic sites, and establishing an approval process to ensure that we are using the Dena'ina language correctly and have correct spellings and all of that.
So you show this as a medium-term timeframe, and this is something that I see that we could do today, you know, and set up a process because we've got the
Yeah.
people. I would make it more of a short term, because I do see this is something that is realistic, and in next year,
Yeah.
next summer, potentially putting up signs at key locations in Soldotna with the appropriate Dena'ina name.
Yeah,
So that's my feeling. I don't see it as a medium term. I see this as something that's easier to achieve than the regional
Yeah.
Organization, the regional council.
yeah,
Yeah, I think the one consideration there, so I've initiated some conversations with the director of the Language Institute, the Dena'ina Language Institute, and of course, she has to run it through their approval procedures as well. So she'll take it to their director. It may have to go before their tribal council. So that may be the one, you know, time limiting factor on that one. But I think you're right. The beginning to build that relationship can happen immediately, and then the implementation may depend on that partnership. So it may be.
But yeah. Come up.
Yep, you need. come-
Bunny, come over here.
This is an easy manageable project as far as place naming. We don't necessarily need permission per se, but you need the correct spelling and enunciations, because like any language, it may be inherent to us, but it's not owned by anyone in particular. So you can write a story or a song or a picture that expresses Dena'ina Athabascan culture. And you don't need permission to do that as long as it is correctly done. And if you have some support in that area, then that's great. So, and which you do have plenty of support. So to add place names, because our Dena'ina Athabascan family has been in this area. We had all the know-how in the food department, see, because we're land dwellers as well as seagoing people. So we provided a great deal of information and education where that's popular. So, and down here on the Kenai, that's we're called Dena'ina because we're.
But
Both
out
of
of
those
out of
peoples.
respect to the tribe, wouldn't it be better to
Oh,
collaborate,
yes,
work together?
what I'm
Yeah.
saying is definitely
yeah.
collaborate, but and that's for your correct enunciation and your correct spelling
Mhm.
and the honor to perhaps where those names came from. and stuff, yeah. But what I'm saying is it shouldn't take all that much time either. It should be approved pretty quickly. So,
Well, and hopefully their tribe is supportive of
oh, indeed.
this going forward.
Of course,
Yeah.
because again, that is a collaboration that is only benefits all communities. Because you're honoring your place. So, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So then recommendation number 7 was to utilize arts and culture to advance city placemaking efforts. I think that's the work you guys are doing such great work on placemaking in Soldotna, and making sure that we just continue to incorporate arts and culture into the current planning efforts like the downtown improvement, the riverfront redevelopment, the wayfinding and the complete streets. And then we also have a recommendation to incentivize arts and culture businesses and public art projects to locate themselves into a downtown area. Kind of the idea of like by putting making them a little bit closer together. We're working towards having an arts district type of feel and really making art very present in that location.
I just wanted to jump in here too to say we were able in our work getting going on this project and while we were interviewing people to connect with the team you've hired for the riverfront redevelopment plan, and we did kind of just cross-pollinate ideas and let them know that we were working on this. And so I think just trying to make sure that we take that step of making sure that all of these different plans that you've got going at one time are all integrated together and supporting each other.
And then recommendation number 8 is to support and facilitate year-round arts and culture programming for all ages and abilities. So the strategies are revitalizing something like the community schools program, continuing and expanding partnerships and programming at the Soldotna Library, continuing support for the summer music series, and then exploring new partnerships with local arts and culture and education organizations like KPC and KPBSD to support their existing programming. So for example, the theater and drama camps and language and culture camps.
If I may.
Yeah.
Kind of expanding on that note about KPBSD under item 8 strategies. I almost feel like that should be kind of a priority partnership similar to what we'd be establishing with the Knights Indian tribe for getting local kids involved in our art installations throughout the community. I think a perfect example of that is the crane sculpture, which went into the Peace Crane Garden. That was a collaboration of a lot of different classrooms throughout the area and getting kids involved in that. And one of my personal priorities that I would love to see coming out of this whole effort would be more public art installations throughout the city. And if we can do so in a way where some of those pieces have, Soldotna kids that are involved in that and getting lifelong interest in the arts established at a young age, that would be incredible.
Yeah. I agree with that for sure. And and that I think that a lot of the work that the library is doing right now as well with kids is really good and really amazing, and kind of building on that as a connection. But I think agree that trying to establish a tighter bond in with KPBSD itself is definitely good.
The artwork that the kids have had at Kena River Brewing up for sale has been very good.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. And they had an amazing show at the Kenai Arts Center that was put on earlier this spring, and it was like a juried exhibit from all over the school district. So kind of continuing to find opportunities to highlight and then also to engage kids, I think is a huge priority. And I think that's also something.
And one way.
Go ahead, Inger.
Okay. Sorry, John, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was going to say that's also something I think that a lot of those types of connection, that kind of connection is something that ultimately, ideally, the Arts Council kind of is playing a role in, and we're kind of having to move towards that. So if we flip back to that sort of that models of how art agencies are set up on page 17, we're going to be initially needing to start out with something like number 2, where the city is actually really fostering and working directly with the partner organizations to help get things moving. But hopefully in the long run, the Regional Arts Council kind of becomes the hub that is the connection point. And so what the city is doing is tied into what the school district is doing and what the tribe is doing, and we can connect across all of those areas. So we'll talk a little bit more about that connection piece. I think it's in the section for the Arts and Culture Council.
And I think that is also one of the beauties of the people that graciously were willing to be on the steering committee too, is Chris Janess, an art teacher for the KPBSD, was on the team with us. And so I think there are some real possibilities for connecting with the schools And also we connected on that with Cam Choi from KPC. So just getting those school connections made, I think is
Actually,
very good idea.
something else to maybe think about is connection between the youth and the senior citizens.
Yeah.
There's a lot of senior citizens around here who know art, different types of art that are not common anymore. And that's going to get lost in the, before too many years.
Yeah.
I have a 96-year-old mother-in-law who still paints and has got artwork all over the area. They still need to get that connection.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
definitely agree with that. And Bunny has a program that she's doing in the schools right now as in her role as culture bearer. And definitely that connection of both on the arts, culture, and history, like across all of that, making that tie back just makes us stronger as a community and ensures we don't lose those skills and that history that we have. All right, so jumping ahead to recommendation number 9 was to explore the adaptive use of vacant spaces for use as maker spaces, co-working spaces for artists and creative startups. One of the barriers that people identified was that it was very expensive and hard to find gallery space and space to studio space to put on shows, etc. And so one of the strategies is to look at how the city could encourage the use of vacant spaces through incentives such as abatement of property taxes, vacancy charges, and other measures. And this is another one that we left a little bit vague at this point. There are some like kind of national guidelines or recommendations or methods you could do to actually do the implementation on this. And that's something that we do have in the appendix, but finding the right triggers that you guys have available that will be effective, but also be reasonable as well as something that needs some further exploration. So on page 30, we start looking at some of the actions that were made sense to be done by the Arts and Culture Council. So these are a little bit broader, and then the city in these plays a role. And there's a column that you'll see in your PDF or your printout copy that kind of briefly describes the role of the city in these recommendations as well. So starting in recommendation 10, that the Arts and Culture Council would conduct ongoing engagement with local arts and culture organizations and the broader community to identify needs, gaps, and opportunities. So this idea that we are at this point, like there's a little bit of a vacuum and a lot of silos that have been in place. And so as this Arts and Culture Council is being formed, going back and continuing this, having this be an ongoing process of seeing how things are going, what opportunities there are and needs and gaps is something that needs to carry on. So strategies are public surveys, focus groups to identify assets and programming needs, a review directories, so you can, or reviewing the directory of arts and culture assets so we can see gaps, and promoting and sharing findings with the community so people understand where there are gaps and therefore also where there probably are opportunities. And the role in the city would be basically to provide information about what the city is doing and making sure that that's all up to date. So programming spaces and then promoting the survey and sharing the findings using the city's communication channels. And then recommendation 11 is to connect artists, performers, arts and culture organizations, and creative businesses to upcoming grants, opportunities, and calls for arts. So engaging with the state and national arts and humanities organizations, regional governments to develop quarterly list of grants and opportunities and call for arts, and then getting those distributed out to local arts organizations. So just making it clear what opportunities there are so that the arts organizations we have can access funding more easily, and the artists can find opportunities to display art and enter shows and all of that. Recommendation number
And
12.
John, do you want to
Oh, go ahead.
just quick also outline the city's role on that one?
Yep, and this is another one where providing information about funding opportunities and calls for arts. So as the city has an opportunity, if we're going to be integrating art into a project, or if there's something that the art fund is going to be funding, when that call for art goes out, making sure it's being communicated to this council. And then recommendation 12 was to develop organizational capacity by seeking funding for paid staff. So the Arts and Cultural Council will be looking to do that. So exploring funding options, including grants, partnerships with local arts organizations to support a paid staff member. One of the things that we heard pretty consistently is that you just need kind of one person who's consistent and there on a daily basis to be able to kind of just manage some of those types of tasks to keep things moving forward. So we put that in as one of their, more important strategies to get work to find a way to get funding, whether that's through a grant or through contributions from different organizations. Yeah, exactly. And ideally that person would be a grant writer and well connected to all of the arts scene in our community. And then recommendation 13 is bring funders, venues, and artists together to allow connection and innovation, holding arts and culture salons to share ideas, plan projects, brainstorm solutions, work collaboratively to strengthen the local artist community, and then also to explore additional opportunities to bring this community together. So First Friday events or artist cooperatives. We had heard from a lot of folks that this idea that that there's, the theater folks know the theater folks, but they don't necessarily know the painters or the potters, and getting this idea of like working to get that group together to discuss their opportunities and their struggles was something that they were very interested in, and it strengthens the overall arts community. And then the city would be participating in and potentially providing space to host these salon events. And then recommendation 14 was to identify opportunities for collaboration and partnership between local municipalities, organizations, and across artistic sectors. So this is coordinating regional events and programming and marketing for the arts and culture scene, and exploring a coordinated First Friday for arts and culture events, including the salons. So there's right now it's everybody has their different openings and for different art shows, and the Native Alaskan art exhibit that's happening, and working to coordinate these into a single event so that we can be promoted, and getting people to think of it that way and engage across all our communities, and was one of the things that we had heard as a key piece. And the city would be participating by participating in the planning sessions and providing event dates. And then the recommendation 15 was develop prepackaged arts and culture programming that meets state standards and connect artists and culture bearers to school. So the Council on the Arts has an artist in school program. And so we want to make sure we tie back to that, leverage that if we can. But this is part of, I think, Jordan, what you were saying with wanting to make sure we make that connection with the schools, but in a way that is really beneficial to the schools and the teachers so that they're excited about it, and bringing that into the classroom for the kids as well. And I think you were getting at a bigger one, though, of broader as well, of how to engage in the programming that the city is putting on and the opportunities for the art the city is putting on as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the last set of recommendations are recommendations best suited to be done by the Chamber of Commerce. Recommendation number 16 is to develop and promote Chamber Calendar as a centralized events calendar for arts and culture events on the Central Peninsula. The strategies on that are to outreach monthly to the local arts organizations, guilds, and historical societies, regional and tribal governments, to find out what's going on and then share about this during their Tuesday morning chamber radio announcements, and then also online and in print. And then a recommendation around developing a campaign to raise awareness, encourage the use of the calendar. The calendar is in existence and can be used for arts and culture things already, but there's not been that connection to the arts organizations or cultural historical organizations. So wanting to get that connection made so that becomes the place people go to look for this and have. So rather than, and this is another one, we're trying to leverage an existing tool rather than create something new. So this is in existence. It's just a matter of getting the word out and getting people to engage with it. And so then the role of the city would be, again, communicating upcoming events and programming, utilizing city communication channels to amplify the messaging and the promotional efforts about this calendar as well. And then recommendation 17 is to develop, maintain, and promote a directory of artists and performers, venues, creative spaces, gallery spaces, historical sites, museums, and arts and culture organizations. And update that list annually, creating and promoting a web portal for community members to submit information, and then share it online and in print, like an example being the Kenai Local Food Directory. And then again, to close the loop by developing a campaign that raises awareness and encourages the use of the directory. You make a tool and nobody uses it, it's not good.
So these
Yeah.
4 recommendations for the chamber, is the chamber buying in on this?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first recommendation 16, we said in the survey again and again, people said, we need a centralized calendar for these things. And Maddie said, we have a calendar.
Right.
We just need
Yeah.
to promote the use of it. So she was part of the steering committee and is
Right.
enthusiastic and on board with being
Okay.
part of the plan. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I would add to that, I'm glad to hear Maddie's been involved with this, but
Yeah.
I might pick her ear on this, is that events calendar, I've used it for, it's a great community resource. There's so much on it, and it's almost a detriment because there is so much on that
Yeah.
calendar. And one thing the chamber might want to consider, which I'll again put the bug in her ear, is potentially an event category filter. Like, okay,
Yeah.
show me the arts categories, show me recreational categories, music entertainment categories, or business
You're on the
things.
chamber
So
board.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I said I'm going to put the bug in her ear. I'm going to start that conversation, but
Yeah, that's a good.
That's a good one. I'll add that to the notes of in our strategies, we could clarify that a little bit around improving the tool that exists.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Perfect. Let's see. So we are on number 18, develop advertising campaign to raise awareness of and participation in local arts and culture assets and events, including arts and culture into existing tourism marketing, including the visitor's guide, and establishing a brand of Soldotna as an arts and culture hub, where I think we're already functionally there. And it's just a matter, I think, of kind of formalizing and making that be part of what we talk about as we talk about the Soldotna area.
And this might look like, for example, in the visitor's guide, they've had a highlight of outdoor activities, maybe top 10 things to do, or top 10 outdoor dining experiences. So maybe it's just developing a similar kind of list of, arts and culture locations in Soldotna that visitors can go to.
And then recommendation 19 was to strengthen partnership between local artists, arts and culture organizations, and local businesses. So this is connecting artists and arts and culture organizations with business training and mentorship opportunities, And then luncheons and after hours events that feature arts and culture businesses and provide opportunities to connect and network. We heard from a bunch of the artists that having some support, they're artists, not business people, and they don't know how to run their art as a business at all. And so this idea of having some kind of connection that could be informed and support in that way was one of the things that they were really interested in.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the recommendation that when we were looking at this and Maddie saw that one, she was like, yeah, we can do that. What day? She was like jumping in, like ready to go on setting up an after hour or a luncheon event.
Oh, go ahead.
As we look through this, there's a lot of great recommendations and things that could be done. As I said earlier, I'd like to see, from a city standpoint, we move forward on getting the names from Denina on our key places right now. But I see it implementation kind of dysfunctional if we've got the Parks and Rec Board and the Library Board, and we don't have a central organization that is taking the lead on helping implement this plan. And I don't know if the steering committee, wants to kind of form an ad hoc regional council for the Central Peninsula, but if it's a little bit here, a little bit there, it's going to be disjointed because nobody's kind of taking the lead or has the pride of seeing the arts and culture plan get implemented. So that's my thoughts. It's a great start, but let's not splinter it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Right. I think that simply being here and bringing awareness to the situation and bringing that the community has really stepped up, and all the interactions that I've had have been tremendously positive, and they're saying, yes, let's get together, let's do more art visibly. And as John was saying, something we can do in the place naming, we can do those things quickly. And the storefronts and murals we can do pretty quickly. And as the communities begin to see these evolving, and I think that in itself will bring many others together, and others to open up their doors and say, okay, we can do this program this day, and we can bring in this family group to this community center this day. And I think just being here and bringing it to the forefront is the first step. And I think that we will inspire those actions. If we have some lovely person with lots of energy who can assist, and the big thing is funding, but that isn't the very bottom line, because it just takes a willingness and giving of resources that we already do have, which are many. I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Wackler.
Hi, thank you for coming and all the stuff, and it's amazing. And I think one of my big questions, it relates back to page 17, which I kind of thought we were going to focus on, is I think everybody wants to do everything that's in the recommendations, and there's a lot of community members that also want to get involved. I don't know if you guys also looked into the community schools program that used to be really vibrant. I know I taught through that as well. One of the big questions, though, is how do we do this? And back to page 17, and I think what you're getting at is I want an implementation strategy. Do we do this as a nonprofit? Do we do this as, all of these different strategies here? Is there one structure that is better for funding, getting these NEA grants, getting the state grants, stuff like that? Is it better to have a nonprofit entity that we partner with, or to have an agency that is separate from the city, that the city funds? Or is it better to have a commission for the city? That was a big question that I have there.
And I think the answer is that different models do work. So these are kind of the 4 models that are commonly used and are functional. And in our particular environment, kind of where, like, based on sort of the fact of the cities and the setup that we have, I think that the ultimate end goal desire would be like that structure number 4, where the city is able to take on the programming that the city is wanting to do, and the funding for public art that the city wants to do, but it's being done kind of in coordination with the region as a whole, and that there's the regional nonprofit arts council that is then able to provide a lot of those more artist support, direct artist support type of grant programs and administering them and that part. So that's I think the end goal where we want to be is number 4, but we are currently at, like structure 0. And to get there, I think we really are needing probably to start out with something like structure 2, where we are working with these other organizations, and really the city, I think, is well positioned to kind of take the leadership in bringing people together and facilitating those conversations that then will result in the creation of that.
Okay. So would your recommendation to go from structure 2 to structure 4 be for us to simply coordinate in a people getting together kind of way, or to create some sort of a specific thing here?
Yeah, I think that the first step is to begin by looking at the structures we have in place already. There are organizations that are already in existence who are nonprofits and are in the art scene. And maybe, in some of the conversations, there was some willingness maybe to expand their scope and maybe take on some of these roles. And then we've got, the chamber has some organizations as well, like with their Vision Soldotna. So there's a few that are already in existence. So maybe rather than creating another one that is another nonprofit that is doing similar work, it's better to leverage an existing structure and move forward with that. But I think that is a conversation where we have to, bring in those partners and really work towards finding what that avenue is. Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Hawkins.
So as I sit here and I looked at the benchmark study, you had Homer and you had Moab, Utah.
Yeah.
And when I look at Homer, you've got a population of 5,725 square miles, and the city is closed down all winter long.
Yeah.
So when I look at Moab, which is 4.8 square miles, 5,300 people, and they are vibrant year round.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of think we should be looking at how they are structured. And I understand there's a lot of times you cannot get money unless you are partnered with a 501c3.
Yeah.
So if I were going to look at this, I'd be looking very strongly at Moab and how they've set it up.
Yeah.
Mr. Joseph?
Thank you. Kind of expanding on some of the comments that we're hearing. I guess I'll start with some of the comments made by Lisa and kind of concerns about losing focus on this.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree that I think we need some kind of entity that's maintaining the ship being steered towards arts in the city of Soldotna, and looking at the way that Homer and Moab do it. They both have city entities that do this. But I do like the long-term goal of getting some kind of regional nonprofit that's going to not only serve Soldotna, but the broader area, and whether that be, through Envision Soldotna or some kind of existing agency that can maybe serve that role, or the establishment of a new 501c3, that's great. I personally really like the idea of establishing an actual body that is dedicated just to the arts, kind of like what Homer has, with an arts commission, and it doesn't necessarily have to be permanent, but in this interim period, as we're going through the development of, establishing a process for supporting arts in our community, I think there's going to be a lot more need for leaning on community leaders to help guide us through that process. And we as a city have the ability to stand up a commission, even if it's temporarily. We could authorize, okay, we're going to create an arts commission. It's going to be established for a year, maybe 2 years. Get some commissioners on them, give them a stipend because they're going to be putting in their time, and maybe they're meeting more frequently, like every month or every 2 months, while we kind of get this on the ground, and they advise on the creation of that regional arts council. And then maybe as that need kind of fades away and we get the regional arts council going, and we transition more of the community leadership within Soldotna over to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board or Library Board, because I know that was mentioned that we have those entities right now that could potentially do this. My concern with exclusively relying on the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board and the Library Board at this point in time is, although they absolutely do have a focus area that I think would correctly oversee arts in our culture, that's not their primary charge. So, I mean, if there's someone that wants to put an arts installation in the park, great. That's something that should absolutely be brought to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. But just by the nature of that board, I don't think we have commissioners on there that are always thinking, okay, what can we be doing as a body to put more art in Soldotna? And something like an arts commission, that would be their focus, actively seeking more art in the community and helping guide the creation of that council. And then again, if we authorize this, it can be for just a year or two, and then it fades away and kind of helps transition the other existing bodies to kind of governing that moving forward.
We need to wrap this up so we can get started on setting up for the next meeting. Any final comments?
I just want to mention too that we want to expand the arts and artful programs into the winter, since it's our longest season, and there has been quite a inspiration for that, and many folks want to see more visitors and more options and winter art. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah.
by the way.
John or Inger, do you guys want to talk about kind of where this is going to go, where this plan will go from here, or how, or I can just say, I
Sure,
mean,
yeah.
if you guys have additional comments or you want to provide, more detailed feedback on this draft, you can either send it to me or John or Inger, and then the goal will be to kind of incorporate all of that feedback and update this draft, and then eventually it will come before you guys again for final
You have a
approval.
time frame on that?
We didn't, we didn't set one, but
Within a few weeks
Yeah.
would be the goal. I think hopefully we could potentially get it before you guys at your next council meeting, a updated draft of this,
Will
or
this,
at the following meeting.
before it comes back to council, will it go to the Planning and Zoning Commission? Will you give them a brief update? I know this was supposed to be a joint work session, and I'm missing
we
my
can't-
planning
yeah.
commissioners.
Yeah, our initial goal was to create this as a joint work session, so they would have an opportunity to weigh in, but it doesn't look like any of them were available this evening. So we'll have to,
Caitlin's input's been extremely valuable.
she has been, yes, as you can see, she's contributed to the plan. But yeah, we'll have to see what that timeline's gonna look like, I guess, and if it'll go when their next meeting is, and maybe we can.
Yeah, the next
We'll get
meeting,
back.
Get this in front of them.
we'll have another one until the end of August.
Oh, right, the first August meeting is canceled.
First August
yes.
meeting is going to be canceled.
Maybe that second August meeting is. a
Let's wrap
more
this up
realistic
so we can
target.
get set up for the next meeting. And Ms. Geese, would you stay for a second? I wanted to show you something.
Certainly, thanks.
Thank you. We'll end
Thank
this.
you guys so much.
Thank you all.
I would like to call the July 12th, 2023 City Council regular meeting to order. Everyone, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Carey? Mr. Chilson?
Present.
Ms. Hutchings?
Present.
Mr. Nelson?
He is requesting an excused absence for illness.
Parker?
Present.
Wackler?
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, with only 4 council members present, any resolution or ordinance to be passed tonight will need to be passed on a 4-0 vote. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda and consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda? Ms. Hutchings,
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda as presented.
may I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson. Are there any changes to the agenda and consent agenda? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I would like to move to add lay down commending resolution 2023-048, commending Alaskins for being named the 2022 Made in Alaska Manufacturer of the Year to the agenda and consent agenda as new business, item number 9B6.
Are there any objections to adding resolution 2023-048 to the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none, it is added to the agenda. Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I would also move to add lay down action memorandum 2023-016, request for an excused absence to the July 12th, 2023 work session and regular city council meeting to the agenda and consent agenda as new business, item number 9C3.
Thank you. Are there any objections to adding action memorandum 2023-016 to the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none, action memo 2023-016 is added to the consent agenda or agenda and consent agenda. Would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
June 28, 2023 council meeting minutes. Excuse me.
Technical difficulties.
Ordinance 2023-022, approving the fiscal year 2023 capital budget and and increasing the estimated revenues and appropriations by $105,000 in the general fund and $105,000 in the small capital project fund. Sponsored by the city manager, public hearing on July 26th. Ordinance 2023-023, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $129,724 in the utility fund and the utility system capital improvements fund for the wastewater treatment plant outfall rehabilitation design services project, sponsored by the city manager, public hearing on July 26, 2023. Ordinance 2023-024, amending Soldotna Municipal Code Section 2.28.250, retirement benefits, authorizing the city manager to develop and institute the deferred compensation employment benefit program from the recruitment and retention strategies, sponsored by the city manager, public hearing on July 26th. Resolution 2023-043, adopting the City of Soldotna 5-year capital plan, sponsored by the city manager. Resolution 2023-044, approving amendments to the Finance, Public Works, Economic Development Departments and Clerk's Office retention schedules and renaming the Management Information Schedule to Information Technology, sponsored by the city clerk. Resolution 2023-045, approving the purchase of a snow quib snow blower head from Yukon Equipment in the amount of $28,581.80 with 84 cents, sponsored by the city manager, approving 2023-046. Resolution of 2023-046, approving the purchase of a Model 552 electric ice resurface from Zamboni Company USA in the amount of $180,869, sponsored by the city manager. Resolution 2023-047, authorizing the purchase of 2 used mechanical street sweepers from Custom Rebuilt in the amount of $140,000, sponsored by the city manager. Resolution 2023-048, commending Alaskins for being named the 2022 Made in Alaska Manufacturer of the Year, sponsored by Vice Mayor Parker. Action Memorandum 2023-014 is not on consent. Action Memorandum 2023-015, cancellation of the August 9th, 2023 regular council meeting. And action memorandum laydown 2023-016, request for an excused absence from the July 12th, 2023 work session and regular city council meeting requested by Mr. Nelson. That is your consent agenda.
Thank you. Would you please show that Councilmember Carey has arrived?
I will, thank you.
Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on any of the items just read by the city clerk? Seeing none, we'll look at Zoom, and there are no hands raised under Zoom. Having no one wishing to speak, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved by unanimous consent. At this point, Vice Mayor Parker will read Resolution 2023-048, commending Alaskans for being named in 2022 Made in Alaska Manufacturer of the Year. Yeah.
So if I do that, can you hear me? Okay. Stand right here. So, thank you. Whereas on Thursday, July 6, 2023, the Department of Commerce, Community and Economic Development announced Alaskans as the 2022 Made in Alaska Manufacturer of the Year. And whereas since 2016, Alaskans have been manufacturing high quality pet treats using wild Alaska fish skins that would otherwise go to waste. And whereas Alaskans has demonstrated a commitment to innovation, both in their efficient use of fish byproducts and their development of a variety of treats for dogs and cats. And whereas during COVID pandemic years, Alaskans preserved and managed to grow their business from an in-home operation to a full-scale production facility with its own storefront. And whereas Alaskans has been a proud sponsor of a variety of organizations, including Kenai Peninsula Animal Lovers Rescue, KPOW, and Kenai Animal Shelter, as well as local 4-H groups and events, high school sports teams, the Kenai River Brown Bears, hockey games, Copper River Basin 300 dog sled race, individual Iditarod mushers, community senior centers, and the Kenai Watershed Forum. And whereas they are heavily involved in the local community and were recognized as the Soldotna Business of the Year for 2022. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Soldotna that the City of Soldotna commends Alaskans for receiving the 2022 Made in Alaska Manufacturer of the Year, and that this resolution shall become effective immediately upon its adoption. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
So sweet.
So now we can.
Beautifully written, lovely. Oh, wow,
Yes.
that is lovely.
There you go.
Wow,
Here.
let's take a picture like this. Okay, ready? Got it.
Okay. Did you get it, Johnny? Okay, look, Johnny's got to get this.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Congratulations.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Should I say something now?
Is it on? It's on. Well, thank you for this. This was really beautifully written and it makes me proud when I hear it, someone else say it, because I think these things all the time, but it's really nice to see it down on paper. So thank you for this. It's lovely. And obviously Soldotna is my hometown, have a long history here, and it's just really thrilling to be back and feel encouraged and supported by the local community. I feel bad you're not at the park today where I just came from. It's our 15 hours of summer. So maybe you could just say yes on everything and deal with the consequences later. Get out of here. I don't know, my thought, but anyway, thank you for this. It's wonderful to be back in Soldotna. I have a beautiful spot. If you have a dog, come to our spots right on the river. Gary Hinkle's, old dry cleaners. I'm in that building where the processing plant was before. It's a great manufacturing plant, a great retail store. So I'm happy to be there. Thrilled again to be in Soldotna on the Kenai River. I can't beat it. It's been my dream and I'm living it, believe it or not, even though I'm broke, but there you go. Thank you. Thanks for this.
Thank you and congratulations. And we are aiming to get out of here as quickly as we can for the Wednesday market. So, yep. Next item is a presentation with prior notice. Tim Dillon, Executive Director of the Kenai Peninsula Economic Development District, quarterly update.
Good evening. First of all, congratulations, Sarah. That's awesome. We appreciate everything that you guys are doing. And, a lot of our small businesses, they're not just trying to make their business successful, they're trying to make our community successful. And I think Sarah's a perfect example of getting involved in all the different areas. And that's what's really key. And what we're trying to make sure that people understand is that don't just hang out your shingle, get involved in the community. And there's a perfect example of how that happens. So next slide, please. Want to remind everybody that KPEDD's oversight is not just Kenai or Soldotna, it's the entire Kenai Peninsula. We're involved in a lot of different things all over the Kenai Peninsula. In fact, we had some folks in today talking about some things on the other side of the water that they are exploring, and we're going to try and give them a hand with how to do that and how to make sure it's done correctly for all of us Alaskans. Next slide. Want to remind you guys, and I'm sure most of you remember this, but we're not government. I don't know how many times I have to tell people that on a daily basis, that they think that we're government. We have a lot of respect for government, don't get me wrong, but one of the advantages that we have is that when someone comes into our office and we close the door, we can talk about whatever. We're not open to FOIA requests. I'm not going to be asked 9 million different questions about what this person had to say. So a lot of people do use us as we're moving forward. Next slide. Our staff has remained the same for the last several years. Abby Dial, as you all know, is a local Soldotna young lady. One change that's going to happen, though, is several of you know, and I appreciate all the well wishes and things over the last 6 months, but I did have a little incident with my heart back in December. I am retiring as of this next December. I'm going to step down as the executive director. Cassidy Cameron will be taking over. I have agreed to keep an office at KPEDD, and I'll be doing some consulting for them and a couple of other folks on some of the different projects we've got going on around the region, especially on the public relations and outreach and trying to make sure that we're getting the funding that we need. But I'm very pleased that Caitlin and Cassidy are stepping up to the roles that they are. Abby is going to continue with us as our research assistant, but if you happen to see her roaming the streets or at Wednesday at the park or whatever, please congratulate her. She was just accepted to go study at Oxford in January. So we're very, very pleased. It's going to limit how much time we get with her next spring, but it's another one of our young people that are doing very, very well. Next slide. Workforce is one of the things that I continue to be asked about, and what can we do, and how do we fix workforce? And I want to remind everybody that workforce isn't just one thing. It really is a three-legged stool. Housing, transportation, and childcare are all key components of whether we have the workforce that we need. KPEDD is currently heavily involved in all three of these different areas. In fact, I was sharing with the clerk right before the meeting that one of the things on the transportation side is that not only is Tyson Cox recently been named to the board for CARTS, but I've also accepted a position on the CARTS board to try and help make some of the things that we need to happen. So childcare, we've got to continue pushing forward with that and seeing what we can do, especially with some of the rules and some of the changes that happened during COVID. And the same thing with housing. So just remember that workforce is not just an easy fix. It's really a three-legged stool. Next slide, please. As you all know, our big project that we've been working on for a while is mariculture. This is the $49 million project. How does it impact a community like Soldotna or the central part? We've been looking at, are there opportunities for manufacturing and value-added processing and things when it comes to seaweed, kelp, oysters, clams, things of that nature. Probably the two biggest components that we've been working on are the revolving loan program. And the revolving loan program, our big concern with that was a lot of people in trying to enter into mariculture were saying, we don't have the collateral to make it work with the regular banks. So we sat down with the banks and really understood what the whole process was and how to fix all that. So what we've done is we've put around $10 million into this revolving loan fund. So if someone were to come to us, say if Vice Mayor Parker came to us and said, I want to get started in mariculture and this is what I want to do. If we thought the business plan made sense and things, what we would do is we would sit down, we'd help her develop her package and try and figure out what collateral numbers she really needed. Then we would commit to backloading her collateral. Then we'd take that whole package to somebody like a Mike Dye at North Rim Bank and say, okay, Mike, I know the numbers don't make sense if we're not involved. Excuse me? But what we would do is we would put that package together and then we would be involved with it. We would be the people that would be backloading, backfilling that collateral. The other one that we've been heavily involved with is equipment, because we want to make sure that our folks have the equipment they need in order to be successful, whether it's a new Flupsy, whether it's, everybody loves to come to the Kachemak Bay and see all the sea otters. Well, I'm going to tell you, the sea otters rip the heck out of all the different oyster containers. So there is a way to prevent that with metal cages instead of the ones that are made out of rope. So we're looking at that to try and help also. But that's that whole mariculture project. Johnny, next page. And again, from a manufacturing standpoint, there's a variety of different things. We've actually been doing some testing down in Homer, doing some drying and things, just trying to see what we can do. Also looking into the commercial kitchen concept and whether we should be trying to develop some portable commercial kitchens that we can move around for people with processing. This is something that the native groups over in Seward really developed some cool commercial kitchens during COVID. And Tom Tugas's son and their operation, they've got a pretty good plan on how to make some of that work. So that's part of what we're working on. Broadband, we are, as you all know, heading that up, and it's not an easy picture. I can tell you there's so many places in the state of Alaska and on the Kenai Peninsula that does not have adequate broadband. So for me to sit here and promise you millions of dollars and you're going to get all these different upgrades, I'd be lying through my teeth, and I don't do that. I'm not sure how much we're going to benefit from the broadband piece here locally. Soldovia, Nanwalek, Port Graham, Halibut Cove, Tyonek, yeah, those places will. But again, it's a process and it's a project we're working on right now. Some of the other projects that we're in the middle of is we were contacted by the Soldotna Senior Center and also by some folks from the Assembly. We have sat down and met with them and started to work with them to try and help them develop into what they need to do in order to not only regain everybody's trust, but also to build off of a good business model and make sure that, you know, I'll be 65 in September. I want to be able to benefit from the senior center and senior meals. We also are still involved and, you know, John has been great to work with on the staff with the River Project, and we'll continue to help with that with the EDA. I've been asked, even though I'm going to retire, can I try and help with some of those pieces? And yes, of course, I'm gonna help with that. The Alaska gas line and the LNG project. One of the key factors that we're working on right now is, yeah, the LNG project is one part of it. What we're concerned about is the manufacturing side. Are there things that we could be developing here locally so that we don't have to rely on the lower 48 or a foreign country? Going back to COVID, when we had the problem with the respirators statewide, when the respirators, there's a piece that they were looking for that they couldn't find. And we were able to go ahead and find out all the 3D printers around the Kenai Peninsula, and that's where those got produced, was here locally with a variety of the folks with 3D printers. Now, I'm not here to say everything can be developed with a 3D printer, but there are some things that we can, and we should be looking from a manufacturing standpoint. How can we go ahead and make sure that we can take care of ourselves? The biggest project that we've got going on, though, is our new website. We're actually going to take our current website that has all the dashboards and things and combine it with the workforce. On top of that, the thing that we have learned, and I was really pleased to hear some of the things going on with the culture and arts community. A lot of nonprofits are using our website in order to be able to pull the information together to apply for grants. So one of the pieces that we're working on from a resiliency standpoint is developing those, not just checklists, but we have a close relationship with funders, whether it be foundations or whether it be government agencies. So when a group is looking for a grant, whether it be the food bank or a local church or, you know, a youth program or whatever, for us to be able to help them and not write it all for them. You know, I have no problem with us editing things, but we want to make sure that these groups have skin in the game. But with this new website, you will have all of those tools, along with, we're in the process, we're going to put some GIS mapping in there that will layer and things. So it really will be, instead of having two different websites to go to, you'll be able to go to one, and it really will be outstanding. You know, tying in with the workforce, whether it be the school district, the construction academy, the college, AvTech, all those different pieces being able to pull together. In fact, the one company that was in my office today, one of their questions was on workforce, and I wanted to make sure they knew, you know, I'll help you, but your number one concern's got to be local hire. We've got to make sure that our people, our local people, are trained and have that opportunity. Next, October, November, when we come in to do our quarterly report, that will basically be my farewell tour. I'll bring Cassidy with me. A lot of you know her already, but we will do that in October and November. Please remember, January 4th is the Industry Outlook Forum. Be more than happy to answer any questions. Sorry, but I've put a lot of time and effort into KPEDD, so.
Any questions for Mr. Dillon? Mr. Kara?
Jim, when I think of you, I think of the term proactive foundation, because for decades you have been, you're going to continue to be, and you are such a proactive person in terms of just listening to you tonight, in terms of the values, the priorities that you have are what make the Kenai Peninsula, what make this state awesome. You have brought KPEDD up to a level it has not been at before. And I've been around a little while and seen different people there, and you've been part of it. I just want to thank you for all you're doing. I want to continue to applaud that I'm hearing you talk about your continuation in terms of success with other people in terms of different groups. You're an outstanding member of our community, and I greatly appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Dillon, for your report, and we'll see you in October or November.
Yes, sir.
Next item on the agenda is a report from Dianne Blumer, Navigate Alaska, a legislative update.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Welcome, Jeanette, and good evening, Johnny. I'm happy to be here in person this evening. I'll be sharing some information about the legislative overview over the last year. And some of it's probably going to be redundant to you or some things that already happened, but every summary needs an opening and a closing. So I'm going to go ahead and go through that in case you missed any of it. Johnny, do you need me to wait just a second? Okay. I also just want it to be a dialogue. So if you have questions along the way, as I go through the presentation, go ahead and feel free to ask me. Session began January 17th. We're on the next slide. The Senate organized immediately in a bipartisan coalition appointing Senator Gary Stevens as the Senate president, and then Senator Kathy Giesel is the majority leader. Senator Wielechowski was the rules chair. And so it was a little bit different. The Senate had been primarily a Republican-led coalition for the last several years. The House organized much sooner than it has been over the last several years. And so they also had a bipartisan coalition that consisted of 19 Republicans, 2 independents, and 2 Democrats. They appointed Representative Kathy Tilton as the Speaker of the House, Dan Sadler as the Majority Leader, and Craig Johnson as the Rules Chair. This year, they only passed 31 pieces of legislation during the first year of the session. There was traction on many others, including several that would be related to PERS, retirement, public safety retirement, some of those kind of things that would impact local communities. But since it's the first year of the legislative session, those bills stay active until the legislature meets again. And then once they die on the second year, all those bills die. So right now, all of the bills that were actually introduced this last year are still in play. The 33 pieces of legislation, that's the third fewest of any first year session since statehood. In 2017, there was only 26 bills passed, and in 2019, there were 29 bills passed. So it's pretty low. Some people think that's good. Less is more sometimes when the government's regulating or introducing legislation. So they did have a lot of work before them. There was a lot of back and forth about the budget, as we all are aware. The permanent dividend fund continues to play a huge role in the budgeting process, and hopefully we'll get some resolution on that soon, and we'll be able to get back to things that are outside of the permanent dividend fund. We didn't make the 90-day session that's statutorily outlined. So the constitutional deadline is 120 days. There was some, for lack of a better word, gamesmanship towards the end. And then there was an agreement, and then there wasn't an agreement on the last day. So the governor immediately called a special session, and it was a one-day session where they were able to reach an agreement and sine die. A few of the bills that were passed, I think that may be of interest here. Then there's more, I'm sure, but I just outlined just a few. The Renewable Energy Grant Fund, this program extends the authorization to June 2033. Since its inception in 2008, the Renewable Energy Fund has distributed over $275 million in grant funds for renewable energy projects across the state. These grant funds have been supplemented by federal and state dollars, as well as local dollars, funding hundreds of millions across the state for stabilizing and reducing energy costs and supporting renewable projects. So that was just that was a sunset extension. HB 69, reclassification of first class cities. This really doesn't apply to you folks, but I think it's always helpful for city councils to know what's the changes that are being made that'll affect other local governments. So notwithstanding the current Alaska statute, a first-class city with a population of less than 400 based on the most recent census may be reclassified to a second-class city if the council submits a written request to the local boundary commission. So basically, it made the method or the process, a mechanism to carry out the automatic reclassification simpler for some of the cities. And I think Galena was one of the cities that was used as an example. HB 128, the oil terminal facility just clarified that vessels that already have oil spill contingency plans that are required and they're in compliance with Alaska law wouldn't have to adhere to the shoreside requirements and regulations. And then the governor's bill, SB 48 carbon offset program and the carbon storage program took up a lot of time between both bodies this year. And this bill allows the state to participate in evolving carbon market in two ways. First, the Department of Natural Resources would be authorized to lease state lands to private parties for carbon management purposes. And then secondly, it would establish a carbon offset program authorizing the Department of Natural Resources to implement projects on state land, or I'm sorry, to implement projects on state lands. So it's a two-part bill. And then SB 87, the lumber grading program. I threw this one on here because it was your Senator Bjorkman that actually brought this bill forward. And this is one of those feel-good bills. It would create a local lumber grading program to allow dimensional lumber produced in-state to be graded locally and then used in residential commercial applications, which right now they're not able to do that. It's also expensive to get certified. So this would allow those smaller lumber companies to actually participate and have their lumber used locally. On to the next slide. This is just a budget summary, a fiscal summary for the final budget that was signed by the governor. This is HB 39 was passed to the governor when they signed, he died. He did not sign it until June 18th, I believe. And it was an omnibus bill, and I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that, just being in local government. But typically the way that it works is the House will prepare the operating budget and the Senate will prepare the capital budget, and then they'll transfer them to each other. Usually the House sends the operating budget over to the Senate first, because then they know if there's money left over for the capital budget, which over the past couple of years, there really hasn't been. So, but for the last several sessions, probably 3, I would say, the House passes the budget over to the Senate rolls the capital budget in there, and then they also roll the appropriations budget into that, calling it an omnibus bill, or some people call it a turducken, or whatever you want to call it. And then they send it back to the House. Well, the House gets upset with that because they don't have then any input into the capital, what capital projects will be moving forward. And it doesn't give them the opportunity to debate it. Once the Senate sends that, but it's the House bill that went over as the operating budget. So once the Senate sends that bill back to the House only gets an up or down vote. They don't get a deliberate or negotiate or any of those kind of things with that bill. If they don't agree or if they don't concur with that bill, then it goes to a conference committee where there's three legislators from each body that will go into a committee and try to hash it out. So we didn't get to conference committee this time. We thought we probably would, but we didn't. So they were able to work out those differences that happened on the last day of session. So in the end, the FY 24 operating budget, the operations portion is 4.4 billion. It's about 146 million, or 3.5% higher in UGF, on designated general funds, than the FY 23 management plan. Agency operations have grown by 507 million, or 13% since FY 18, which was the lowest recent year. However, the Anchorage CPI has increased by 18.1% between the first half of the FY and April of 2023, which is the most recent data that's available. So spending growth has been less than inflation since that point. And the 4.4 billion for agency operations is slightly below FY 14 And since then, Alaska has experienced about inflation of about 20.5%. So every year, the Department of Revenue puts out a spring forecast. They anticipate how much oil will be and what the market will look like. And so this year, the spring forecast projected an average oil price of $73 per barrel for FY24. That the FY24 budget is estimated to have a surplus of about 287 million. If the price averages less than $68 per barrel in FY24, the budget would end up in a deficit. So $68 about for oil is the breaking point, or the break-even point. The legislature sometimes includes deficit language. This year they didn't. So if the oil falls below that point, the deficit's unfilled, and they'll probably have to reconvene and figure something out. Appropriation language is also included in the 24 budget, that if revenue were to exceed the spring forecast, the amount of the excess would be split in half between the constitutional budget reserve and a deposit into the dividend fund. And what they're doing with that is they're going to, if that were to happen, then in FY25, there would be an energy relief payment to every man, woman, and child, along with the PFD. It would be about $500. And the energy relief appropriation will be capped at $3.18 million. So that was kind of their compromise, I think, at the last minute to get the $1,300 PFD that everyone will get. And they said, look, if oil goes up, we'll give them another 500 next year, but we'll call it an energy relief. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Do you guys want me to stop for questions, or I talk really fast, so. This slide is just a quick snapshot of the unrestricted revenue sources. So you'll see that the percent of market value is actually starting to become the #1 revenue source instead of petroleum. And I think that we'll continue to see that be the #1 source unless something really crazy happens with the market. The next slide, this slide I like to show, and it's a little bit outdated. You guys will see that it only goes through FY 2022. But I like to show this because it's a really good snapshot of what the budget, what actually happens with the budget and the ebbs and flows, and why it's so difficult to develop the budget through 60 different people throughout the legislative process with 60 different priorities. So it changes from year to year. The lime green shows the forecasted revenue, primarily the oil revenue. The purple is the percent of market value. So you can see right around 2016-17 when the POMV got passed and started becoming a revenue source for the state. The dark blue is agency operations, which is typically the legislature, the judiciary, and the university. And you'll see that it went up right around to 15, and then it starts going down a little bit after that. And if we looked at this year, you'd see it be slightly up a little bit more this year. The light blue is the capital budget, and that's the target money that's the money they target every year when there's not enough for anything else. And the unintended consequences of that become jobs, infrastructure, deferred maintenance, some of those things. So we've had a really small capital budget, as you can see, over the last 7 or 8 years. We'll probably see when they add this next couple of years on there, you'll see a larger light blue, just because you'll see that IJA money is in there then. So it'll be inflated a little bit, but it won't really be money from the UGF. And then the orange that you see throughout that graph is the money that was taken from the ERA, the earnings reserve account, which was the state savings account besides the constitutional budget reserve. And so when we were short money, we just took money out of the ERA, and you probably read about that in the news all the time and hear about it in elections all the time. But that's what the orange is for. So, and then finally, the yellow is things such as debt service, fund capitalization, community assistance, some of those things that you folks rely on as well. And you'll see that the yellow has gone, that funding has shrunk pretty drastically as well. This is just a snapshot of the overall budget. I think it's a handy tool to be able to look at. But I put it in there particularly because the capital budget amount is in there, which is 362 million. It's 51.8% smaller than FY '23. And that's huge to local governments. When you're thinking about school major maintenance, deferred maintenance, infrastructure money. 51% is a pretty large cut. But with that said, it still ranks as the second largest capital budget since 2015, FY 2015. So just due to constraint spending, but that's typically the place that they'll cut first every time is the capital budget. This next slide just shows you a little flavor of what the UGF looks like, which is the very bottom blue. And this slide's a little bit outdated too. Legislative Finance hasn't had the time to update yet. Then the snapshot. But you'll see that most of the money that comes in is from the federal government match money. But it's just a really quick snapshot of what the capital budget looks like. And then local capital budget projects. You guys are all familiar with this. You're very familiar with the priorities, and I anticipate that in the fall you'll come up with maybe a new set of priorities or keep them the same. It's unfortunate because with most local governments lately, they're the same priorities because they're not getting any capital funding anyway to move on to and the next project. This year, in addition to AML fly-in, the former city manager, Stephanie Queen, and then Kyle flew down to Juneau. We met with 12 legislators. We met with the DOT commissioner. We met with the governor's chief of staff. We were really advocating heavily for the need and the impact of the field house in particular, but along with the other priorities. And unfortunately, because of lack of funding and very, very few capital requests were granted at all. And many of them that were granted were vetoed when the governor finally signed the budget. So we'll continue those discussions again next year, I suppose, both with the AML fly-in and then hopefully with the city fly-in. But remember, when you're talking to your local legislators, remember to advocate too for what your priorities are, because it's super important that they understand them. I think they did really understand them, but we did a lot of advocacy with our own legislators as well. So that's really important. We talked about the governor signing and then the vetoes. This is a really small slide. There were many vetoes, but there were a lot of very small vetoes. The big ones, he vetoed about a total of 200 million, approximately 87 million in one-time funding that was approved by the legislature for public K-12 schools. It was said to be critical for the rising costs and also because it's been flat funding for several years. The legislature had passed a budget that included a 175 million one-time funding for increase to public education. The governor vetoed 87 million of it. There were several attempts to try to get the required votes to be able to get to a special session to override the governor's vetoes, and they were not successful in doing that. However, there is still, and I don't know that there's the will for it in either body, but there is an opportunity for when they reconvene, they have 5 days from when they reconvene the next session to actually try to do a veto override. But at this point, I don't think we have the will in either body for that to happen. So just to rattle off a couple of these, and I won't go into the whole detail because I think everybody's waiting to get out into the sun. $1 million for rural public radio funding, 140,000 to Alaska Legal Services. That was primarily for civil legal services and some survivors of domestic violence. There was 750,000 for reentry housing, 500 million for ANSEP, the Alaska Native Science and Education Program, which is a little unfortunate because that program is super beneficial, I think, for some of the youth that come out of the rural Alaska and want to go into the engineering field. 3.5 million for Head Start. There was 500,000 for Crisis Now. There was 550,000 to produce a State of Alaska Policy and Procedure Manual, which I don't have any idea why it costs 550,000 to produce a manual, but that was vetoed also. 1.2 million was one of the big ones that was vetoed for workforce development, and then 35 million to the University of Alaska capital projects. also 10.4 million in the major maintenance grant for school funding, 4 million in matching harbor grants, and then 30 million that was supposed to be deposited into the community resource or community assistance fund, which I just have to say, I just really dislike the community assistance name. I liked it better when it was revenue sharing because I think that's a more appropriate title for that funding. But it's super unfortunate that he vetoed that as well. And so I think that'll be one of the big pushes next year to try to recapitalize that fund and get it back up to where the communities are getting at least the funding that they were used to over the last couple of years. So on to the next slide, keeping things to keep on our radar, the community assistance, as we just talked about, school bond debt reimbursement. I think it's really important to continue to advocate and look at and ensure that the cost shifting of essential services to local government is not a budget mechanism for the state of Alaska. Whenever there's a cut, that they need to make a cut, that the cost shift to the local government. And I think through AML and through a couple other advocacy groups, we need to make sure that that's on everyone's radar and watching and making sure that the voices are heard from the local governments. And then shared taxes. So things to remember, December 15th, the governor's proposed budget will be released. January 16th will be the first day of session next year. January 31st, the supplemental budget will be introduced, and then an amended budget will come out in February. If we were going to meet the statutory requirement, we would be done by April 16th, which we haven't met in quite some time. So likely we will be done hopefully around May 17th. So that is a little bit of a wrap up, and overview of what happened this year. I anticipate in the fall, you folks will have new priorities that we can discuss and talk about what the strategy is for moving forward to ensure that when they're hopefully divvying out some capital budget money, Soldotna is on the forefront. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Any council questions? I do have one. There's been rumor that in October, they may have a special session to discuss sales tax. Have we heard anything or hear anything new about that?
So there has been rumors about a special session for a sales tax and for some oil tax. I've not heard a lot of people in favor of it. So in fact, I would say we likely won't see a special session this year. But that's just my prediction. Things can change quickly, but right now there isn't anything on the docket for a special session in October.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Thank you, Diane, for coming and for advocating on behalf of the city in Juneau during the last legislative session. Rumor has it that the reason that the governor was adamant on getting Senate Bill 48 through was that this was all 48 and 49 through, is that it was tied to getting partners for Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation, the Alaska LNG project. Did you hear discussion about that in Juneau? I know the governor at RDC said that in the very near future, there's going to be a big announcement regarding the LNG project, and that's something that's of interest to folks here on the Central Peninsula. So did you hear anything about that tie between SB 4849 and the gas line project?
So I probably heard the same kind of rumors that you heard. I wouldn't say I have a reliable source on those rumors, so I'm hesitant to say one way or another. But I would also say that the LNG project is related also to the recent development of it's probably not so recent, but Hill Corp and the gas supply here in the inlet. I think that there's two bills out there that are renewable portfolio standards. And each time that we've talked about those RPS bills, the gas line has come up. And I think, during Senator Murkowski's state of the state or state of the nation or whatever it is, she mentioned that that she wasn't thrilled about us importing petroleum, importing gas, right? So that became kind of a big issue, and then rolled out several more overviews from the AKLNG. So I think there's a multitude of things that play into the AKLNG, and I think they've probably got more traction this last year than they have over the last several years. And as you know, they're talking about a smaller pipe, right? Bringing it down cheaper, more efficient, faster to build. So we'll see what comes with that. But I heard the same rumors about the carbon bills, but I don't have anything to put my finger on. So, but I'll let you know if I hear anything more.
Anything?
I must say, I was disappointed in the governor's vetoes towards education, both at the K through 12 as well as the university, because particularly as organizations work on workforce development, education is so vital. So hopefully he'll turn around during next year.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, and
for
I
your
look
report.
forward to seeing you guys all flying.
Oh.
We make it a lot of fun when you come down.
Yep. We'll just wait and see what happens in the next few months.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comments and presentations. Items other than those appearing on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the chambers wishing to speak on any item not on the agenda? And I'm going to guess that gentleman there with that trophy that's going to stay in Soldotna for the next 20 years. Please step forward.
Well, it's my honor on behalf of the Kenai Peninsula Food Bank to bring this trophy, the King of the River for 2023, and award it to the city of Soldotna. You took in 20,964 pounds and Kenai did 16,820. So pretty amazing. And we thank you very much for that support and the effort. Just a really quick overview. We still have folks that are struggling with the SNAP backlog. We still have folks that have been waiting since November. We also have seen, they predict by the end of the year, a 74% drop in the government commodity program. And we're already in the 60% drop there. So we have had to pick up the difference in that, and doing something like this makes a gargantuan difference for us. We're still averaging almost 20 new applications a week right now. In the Fireweed Diner, we just rearranged it for the last time. We got 12 more seats in there, but we've actually for the last few weeks been filling up every day. So we're looking at 90 to 110 people a day that are eating lunch versus 30 to 40, what was kind of the normal. So this comes at a wonderful time, and we thank you very much for that.
Any comments, questions from the council? Mr. Chilson.
I'd just like to say thank you to you and all of your staff at the food bank and your role in making this food drive possible. And I just like to add that I actually kind of hope Kenai beats us next year, because I would love to see this rivalry go back and forth. And when they win, we win. Doesn't really matter if food bank wins. So just glad to see it happening in our community. So
If there's only one winner in this, and that's the people who get the food.
And I'd like to say I'm very proud of everyone in Soldotna or any outlying area that supported Soldotna in this effort. And I was amazed when I saw that the total was 37,000 pounds. That's a truckload of food, and we really appreciate it. And I know those people that need it really appreciate it. So thank you.
And thank you.
And we will
And
put that.
The first
someplace-
pitch is in the cup, the ball.
We will put that someplace and make sure that Kenai sees some pictures of it.
Yes. And we have thought ahead, so we're ready for years of adding on. So,
You just put them on there to begin with. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Anybody else in the chambers wishing to speak on any item not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll take a look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised. Moving on to the next agenda item is Assembly and Legislative Report. Are there any representatives from the borough or the state in attendance would like to speak? And I see. Okay. Well, we were kind of thinking of just leaving it there.
Thanks. Tyson Cox, Borough Assembly, District 4, Soldotna. First, I would like to say something real quick about KPED is that hearing Mr. Carey's comments is, I think you guys will be in good, well, we'll all be in good hands with Cassidy Cameron getting into that position this winter. I'm also on the KPED board, so we've been going through this process for a while. She's been with KPED for a while. I think she has a lot of the same vision that Tim has had. And with her and Caitlin and then Abby in and out, I think we'll be in good hands because we'll also have the leadership of Tim if needed. He'll be there, you know, as on an as needed basis. But I just want everyone to stay confident in that KPED will be doing a good job because I really think the leadership will be good. And then the one thing I was really coming to talk about is we had a resolution last night, resolution 2023-048, and it's a resolution to put an advisory question on the ballot, asking for whether the Kenai Peninsula Borough should change the regular election date from October to November. It was postponed specifically so that cities could start to weigh in on that. I did hear, I heard a lot from cities, but mostly the biggest city that we did hear from was South Peninsula and Homer. They were very loud about wanting to have a little bit more say in this. And why that's important, I know this is just an advisory vote, but the reason it's important is when we do advisory votes, we still want to make sure that people are informed. And part of that being informed is how it would affect cities and possibly how cities are then going to run their elections. So any information that the city of Soldotna would like to bring forward, we will be voting on that on our August 1st meeting. And so that would mean, I believe you guys have one more meeting until then. So if it's something that you guys want to discuss, that's why I wanted to make sure I brought it forward here today. Again, that is just advisory, which I've been very clear about. I'm not a big fan of anyways, so I probably won't be voting in that direction for the advisory vote itself. But we had a lot of people come in, and some of the comments were talking more about maybe what we should do differently than that, is that maybe this is a bigger picture. Maybe there's a bigger item to look at rather than just changing the dates, because the whole goal of changing the dates is to get more people to turn out. So maybe look at doing something a little different than that and seeing if there's other options we can have to have a better turnout and maybe go in that direction. Because I know at least our clerk, there was a memo that did come with the resolution and there's pros and cons on there. And I did ask our clerk about that, and our clerk is not exactly on the same page as these pros and cons. So I do think we all need to talk to our clerks. We need to make sure that the people that are running those elections, that they feel it's going to be something that could be successful, and maybe the pitfalls that come with that. And from the cities, I think that's probably, even for an advisory vote, things that need to come forward as, okay, if this is what we're going to do, these are going to be the pros or cons to our cities, which again, would probably be some of the similar ones to the borough as well. Because I mean, the reality is we could change and you guys could stay the same, you know, be on different months. I don't know how that would look, but that's always an option. I mean, it would either mean making a deal to use our voting machines, if even possible. I don't know if you can do it. I think they have to be tested before that. So I don't think we could even share machines at that point. So the other thing to consider is one of the things that we talked about was it would take 2 full sets of people to work those polling places. And I asked the other day, and over a course of about 3 weeks, we used just under 300 people to do that. And so we would have to double that amount. And to double that amount is going to be very difficult on the peninsula. We struggle very much right now to get the 300 that are needed for one set of elections. And then, like I say, Ms. Blankenship would be another one to ask because she's done it for forever. Is most of those people, and I wouldn't say all of them, but a good number of those people will come and do our elections, and then they will do the state elections as well. So the question becomes, how are we going to have that many folks to do two sets of elections. I know there was a little bit of talk of commingling and how that would have to be controlled, because if there's two people sitting next to each other, this person, if they work for the state and they're signing people in, and this person works for the borough or city and signing people in, we cannot have any of that commingled, or because that would be, I believe, against the rules for the elections. Is these ones are trained and certified to be on the state, these ones are trained and certified to be on the borough city. And so there's some of those questions that come up. If we continue with ranked choice voting, that's another question that comes up. You would have some ballots over here with ranked choice votings, some ballots over here without ranked choice voting. And then I haven't even gotten into all of our service area different ballots that we would have several different ballots over on this pile. I just think there's a lot more to talk about, I guess, than just putting it on a advisory vote, but that's just my opinion. But anyways, the biggest part to this is that I think the cities need to weigh in at some point, because if we make a decision based on some of the information we have and it's not information from cities, it could greatly still affect the cities. So other than that, if there's any other questions on this or on anything else we did last night, I'm open for any questions.
I can assure you, Mr. Cox, that is on the #1 list on our agenda right now that we are looking at, and you will have some comments about that before next meeting.
Perfect. I think that will be great.
Ms. Hutchings.
Yes, through the mayor. Mr. Cox, I was going to ask you if there's any area in the state that has both of their elections on the same day.
There are two areas. Let me look, hang on just a sec. Yes,
I thought,
Denali and Matsu. And just to note, I asked what the populations of those were. Matsu was over 100,000. It was more comparable to us. Denali's like 1,800 people. So for them to switch theirs is a lot different of a process. I mean, they may have been hand counting before that. So I don't know I don't know what they were doing, but I know it's a different process. It's a much smaller process than what we have here. And so I think it's not a very comparable process, but Matsu definitely is.
And how has that worked for them?
I'm hearing mixed. I'm hearing from some people that it's good. I'm hearing from some people that are more involved in it that there's definitely hiccups. Whether their numbers have gone up, I have been told that their numbers on those even years have gone up. But I will tell you, that's one fact that I asked our clerk, is I had her look back several years, and it's actually, we're always up on even years. And I would say that's probably because there's more signs, more information out, and people just are more aware of what's happening. So my question would be, is for this amount of change and work, is how much will that percentage go up? Not just that we're a higher percentage than odd years, but that's just something I've been looking at. I may call and try and talk to Matsu and see what that difference is pre doing this to doing it now, and see how that percentage has changed. Because I mean, it's just a balance.
Anything else? Vice Mayor Parker.
so in Matsu, do all the cities also go with November?
I want to say they're still on October.
Okay, so it's just the borough that does. So
Yep.
we could go where the borough just did assembly elections and whatever,
Yep.
school board in November, but cities could stay with October.
They could, but you'd have to either rent machines, hand count, do something, because you would not be able to use our machines. That I'm like, Ms. Blankenship would be better at knowing the amount of time, but I know that there's a bunch of testing that has to be done on the machines. And that testing takes up, that's one of the problems we had before with even trying to borrow state machines. And that's one of the reasons that the borough bought their own machines, is because we could not program them and then test them within the period of time to have both ready for the elections that were available.
So a lot of issues involved, but
I think there are, and that's, I guess, the biggest thing is it's not that it's not possible. And I don't even think it's a horrible idea. On the front side, it sounds like a great idea. But what I'm saying is I think we're going awfully fast by bringing it up right now, right before election, rather than, even if we wanted to have it on a ballot, I'm actually thinking it should wait a while, and we should make sure that we have all our ducks in a row and say, okay, this is what we're looking at. The sponsor, his was the opposite. He wanted to send it to people first and not do any work at the borough level and see if people are interested, was kind of how he was stating it, which I get that too, is see if people are interested first. But I think when we send it out as some sort of a vote, I don't know if that's the right direction. We should have some information for people and say, this will be the repercussions of this. Is this what we go towards? Because even in an advisory vote, people believe that to be true. And so even though it's only advisory, is several people would be, in fact, a lot of people would be mad if that's not the way the vote went. Because a lot of people do believe those to be a final vote, even though they state very clearly that they're not.
We could end up with the government's first in government.
We
first in
could.
government.
We could have some issues that way too, but
Okay. Thank you very much.
thank
I
you.
Don't see any other hands raised around here.
When I'm in a jet, I'm just gonna remind you that Ellie Nelson, I believe she just got done. I was trying to catch her, but it got too long. And then Digging Dirt is down there. And if you've gone to them last year, they were excellent. So if you guys get out of here and can make it, I think they're going for the next hour and a half or something. So anyways, have a good evening.
Yeah, continuing on, I see no hands raised for the Assembly or Legislative reports. So moving on to the next agenda item is public hearings. Ordinance 2023-019, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $16,790 in the general fund for an increase in scope to the audit services contract, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Ms. Hutchings.
I make a motion to enact ordinance 2023-019, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $16,790 in the general fund for an increase in the scope to audit services contract, presented by the city manager.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is brought before you as a request of the finance director, who couldn't be here this evening. So thank you. Someday I'll remember the microphone. There's an increase in the contract, and it's really due to the two GASB implementations. One was last year, GASB 87, and this next year will be GASB 96. Which involves IT contracts. Again, will be a lot of work to gather the materials and do the review by the auditors. Also, there's this additional work due to the GEO bond for the field house as well. And single audits because of grants and other funding that we've received as well. So the increase is $790.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button. And phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone in the council chambers wishing to speak on ordinance 2023-019? Seeing none, I'll look at the Zoom, and there is no hand raised on Zoom. Having no one wishing to speak, this item is back before the council. Have there heard any council comments? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote.
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Carrie.
Yes.
You have 5 yes votes.
Thank you. Ordinance 2023-019 passes on a 5-0 vote with one absent. Next item on the agenda is ordinance 2023-020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $3.5 million in the general fund, $250,000 in the small capital projects fund, and $3,750,000 in the Soldotna Regional Sports Complex Capital Project Fund, reallocating $575,000 in the Soldotna Regional Sports Complex Capital Project Fund, and authorizing the use of remaining already appropriated American Rescue Plan Act funding for construction of the Soldotna Fieldhouse, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to enact ordinance 2023-020.
May I have a second, please?
I'll
Ms. Hutchins.
second.
Thank you. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. This ordinance is a result of our June 14th public work session with council, where we strategized the funding mechanisms to enable the city to bid the construction of the Soldotna Fieldhouse. So before you is the appropriating ordinance that includes several different funding sources. Again, enabling the city to put the project out to bid, hopefully within the next week or so. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App is used by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this ordinance 2023-019? Seeing none, I'll take a look at Zoom. I see no hands raised on the Zoom. Having no one wishing to speak, this item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the administration, again, I certainly support this, and you've got the listed amount, except could you give me at least a ballpark on authorizing the use of remaining already appropriated rescue ARPA funds? Ballpark?
Yes, thank you. Through the mayor, ballpark is about 750,000. So
Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Harry,
Yes.
Chilson.
Yes.
You have 5 yes votes.
Ordinance 2023-020 passes on a 5-0 vote with 1 absence. Ordinance 2023-021, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $11,200 in the general fund for the use of the Alaska Records Management System, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Ms. Hutchings.
I make a motion to enact ordinance 2023-021, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $11,200 in the general fund for the use of Alaska Records Management System, presented by the city manager.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak to the financial portion if there's any other. Thank you. I will speak to the financial portion of this, and if there's any other questions regarding the actual arms system, I'll turn that over to the chief. As stated in the included memo, we do have a contract with the Department of Public Safety, and in that contract, we are actually to pay to the state a fee for the arms system. We have not done so ever. We've actually never been invoiced since 2014. And in 2019, it was actually taken out of the budget because we were not going to be invoiced, and that was kind of what we were told at that time. However, we are now being invoiced for the services, and because it is in the contract, we do need to pay that. So this increases the budget to pay for those services.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the chambers wishing to speak on ordinance 2023-021? Seeing none, I'll take a look at Zoom. I see no hands raised on Zoom. Having no one else wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Mr. Chilson.
This might be more towards the chief. I just trying to understand what the system does. How does this differ from APSIN?
Through the mayor, Absinthe is a state-run, kind of like a database on personal files that are kept within the state system. This is a report writing and evidence management system.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Carrie.
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
You have 5 yes votes.
Ordinance 2023-021 passes on a 5-0 vote with 1 absent. Next item on the agenda is administrative reports, community engagement memorandum by Vice Mayor Parker. Report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Here recently, we've the city's had comment from public about various things, and I thought it would be worthwhile for us to put together a community engagement plan that identifies, instead of going on an ad hoc basis and going, oh, next month there's this event that's going to happen. Maybe we should participate, that we have a more coordinated, collaborative process in place. All of us are very proud of the city of Soldotna and what we do here, but I think we as a council need to be more engaged and out in the community, particularly when there's community events. So in this engagement plan that I put together, I identified events by the month, but I also identified once a quarter where we would have a community coffee chat. And we would put together and we would say, you know, we're going to be at Kaladi's, or we're going to be at different coffee places where come and talk to the mayor and the city council, and we'll buy you a cup of coffee, and just come. And so people could do that. And that's what I put forth tonight for your consideration, comment. I think it's better to kind of have a coordinated versus flying by the seat of your pants all the time. And that it also shows our residents that we care about them and we want to hear from them. So that's my report. I'm not sure if it requires formal council action, what the next steps are, but that's what I bring forth this evening.
Any council comments? Mr. Chilson?
Well, thanks to Vice Mayor Parker for putting this together. I'm fully supportive. I think it's a great idea. The immediate question that comes to mind for me is, would we have limitations on the number of participants of council members on these, or would we be able to have the full council show up for these coffee talks as long as we do a public notice? And maybe that's to the clerk.
Through the mayor, as long as we have public noticed it. And particularly with community coffee chats, those would be things that I would see as public notice on our city page, that council members would be there.
Sure.
So as long as, and I would defer to the expert on making sure we're in compliance with the Open Meetings Act to make sure that
Excellent.
we would stay in compliance.
Maybe we have our clerk participate or something. I see potential there where, like, maybe we have a community member that comes up and they want to talk about something that's potentially a controversial in the community, says, okay, hey, you know, what are your guys' opinion about annexation? Suddenly we have a 6-member council body talking about annexation and kind of some of their opinions back and forth in the community, which I just want to make sure we're fully above board on that. So.
Go ahead.
Through the mayor, Mr. Chilson, yes, we would be noticing anything that had more than 3 council members attending it. And maybe just advertise it as kind of like a work session / coffee chat thing, but make it more casual, but definitely advertise that it is potentially the full body.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other comments?
The other, if I might, Mayor Whitney, the other item that I put in, particularly when we have Wednesday in the park, that once a month during the summer months, that we have a tent down at the park where people can come and sit and chat with us if they so desire. And we could have brochures, informational brochures about the city, about the projects that we're working on, the status of those things. We do a lot of great things, but I don't think a lot of folks in the public are aware of all the stuff that is going on here. And it's just making the community more aware and making them also proud of our community and the work that is done by our city staff.
Any other questions or comments? I do have a quick thing on the Wednesday in the park. Were you referring to 1 week a month? And preferably on a non-meeting night?
Yes.
Any?
Only during that 12 to 5 type time period, not extending into.
And not necessarily the whole
Correct.
council.
Correct.
Any other comments or any action that council wants to take? Saying none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And that would be, if I can find it here. Action memorandum 2023-014, authorizing the city manager to exercise the first one-year extension with BDO for external audit services introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Carey. And may I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Chosen, and report from the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is on the consent, excuse me, it was not on the consent agenda because the ordinance needed to pass first because it actually funded this contract. So this is in conjunction with the previous ordinance to increase the funding for the audit contract with BDO. And this actually authorizes now the one-year extension and the contract itself.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the chamber wishing to speak on the action memorandum 2023-014? Seeing none, I'll take a look at Zoom. I see no hands raised. Having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Carrie,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Wackler.
Yes.
You have 5 yes votes.
Action memorandum 2023-014 passes on a 5-0 vote with 1 absent. Next item on the agenda is mayor and council reports. And I'd like to thank everyone who participated in the food drive. I think the city of Soldotna and the people who support the city of Soldotna did an outstanding job. I'd like to thank Vice Mayor Parker for standing in for me. I had to be in Minneapolis. And if this happens again next year and they do the 4th of July, I have to be in Austin, Texas. Whether I'd rather prefer being here. Progress Days is coming up, Friday, July 21st through Sunday, July 23rd. We'll be doing the barbecue, and we need volunteers, of course, for the barbecue serving, and we will have Coca-Cola donating their trailer and providing drinks from there, and so we'll need 1 or 2 people in there also. That'll be free hot dogs in the barbecue on Saturday, July 22nd from noon to 4 p.m. at Soldotna Creek Park. Also that day, the city of Soldotna, in conjunction with a group, will be passing out white spruce saplings with instructions on how to plant them, how to take care of them, and everything else. Hopefully these can replace some of the trees that we've lost over the last number of years here around town. Fiscal year 24, cycle 1 mini grant application period opens July 15th through August 15th. So if you know of anyone's looking for some funding, please get that information out to them. Another thing coming up on Progress Day weekend, there's a lot of things happening around this community, and there's a big vet appreciation outfit going on out in Sterling. It's put on by Abate. It's a 2-day event honoring veterans. So, and the last thing I have on my list of things here is Industry Appreciation Day will be held August 19th. That's a Saturday in Kenai in the park strip there. Council reports on boards and commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, July 5th, 2023. Councilmember Wackler.
Yeah, I have my the pleasure of having the first planning and zoning committee meeting that I attended. It was a pretty uneventful meeting. Really, most of it was encompassing approving a signage that exceeded the maximum allowable signage for a parcel in the city of Soldotna. That was the new Tanner's Alaska Seafood. So they actually put in their sign before getting their special approval due to some other things, but it was approved. And that led to a discussion about how some of the coding has people come to get those special dispensations of code. I don't know what's the term there. What was that? a waiver, yeah, where they can be approved for something outside of code. And that led to a discussion about how they'd like to change code, which led to the city planner saying, yeah, that's not gonna happen. They just don't have the staff to rewrite that code at this time. So I think there's a lot of people out there that know in the industry that just know that you can probably get approvals for those if you go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So it's become sort of a circle of everybody knows that a lot of these signs don't fall into code. Code should be changed. It's too hard to change code. So here we are again. So it was pretty quick to get that approved. There was also some discussion about the commercial core district being brought up, but they're pausing on that until the riverfront master plan has been created to go more on that commercial core district. I don't know if you guys are familiar with planning and zoning's idea on that. And then the next question was whether the roadway for the east readout to punch through on that backside that kind of connects the park, like basically where we are on that. And the answer is that we're waiting on the plat from the borough for the purchase to be approved. So that ends my comments on the planning and zoning.
Any questions for Ms. Wackler? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, City Manager's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Recognizing that everyone wants to be at the park, I have just a related item to the park today. Levitt AMP representative was in Soldotna, had a lunch meeting with the representative and members of the chamber. And she expressed how thrilled they are with what's the music program in the park, and express their continued support for our activities. And that, I'm going to end it there so that we can get out in that part.
Any questions for the city manager? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, public comment. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? Seeing none here in the audience, let's take a look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised on Zoom. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, council comments. We'll start with Ms. Hutchings. Thank you for your comments.
Make them quick. I would just like to thank everybody that came and presented tonight. I thought it was very informative. And on that note, I just want to say that my phone is saying it's 66 degrees and it's sunshiny at the park, so I'm ready to go.
Ms. Wackler.
I was actually really excited to hear that KPEDD was helping the Soldotna Senior Center. I love that idea of them helping get their structure and maybe help them figure out what they need to do. I was super excited to hear that. And I love that they've got their fingers in so many things. I'm excited to hear how it's going to be with the new person at the head. And yeah, I would like to get outside too. Thank you.
Mr. Chilson,
No comments.
Vice Mayor Parker.
No comment.
And last but not least, the last one here, Mr. Carey.
No comment.
Moving right along. No reason for an executive session tonight. Meeting announcements, July 17th, 2023 Library Advisory Board meeting at 5:30 p.m. July 28th, City Council meeting at 6 p.m. Seeing no other items on our. Should be July 26th. Two demerits for that. So July 26th, City Council meeting, 6 p.m. Seeing nothing further on our agenda, we are adjourned.